In a panic, the friends quickly looked around for a way out. The flickering light overhead cast eerie shadows on the walls, making every corner seem like a potential threat. They gathered the evidence they had found, stuffed the documents into their bags, and prepared to go to the surface. As they made their way back, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors. Whoever was in charge of continuing the doctor's experiments was now aware of their presence. The friends moved as quietly as possible, their nerves on edge at every creak of floorboards and distant clank of metal. They reached the staircase leading to the main level of the shelter, but barely had they begun to ascend when the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The oppressive silence was broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant sound of footsteps growing closer. Using flashlights, they cautiously made their way up the stairs, but the darkness seemed to swallow the light, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The feeling of dread increased with each step, the feeling that they were being watched pressed down on them. When they reached the top of the stairs, a horrifying sight appeared before them. The corridor they had walked down earlier was now filled with strange, grotesque figures. At first glance, they appeared to be mannequins, but a closer look revealed something far more horrifying. They had once been patients, but now they were bodies that had been distorted and deformed by the doctor's experiments into unnatural shapes, with expressions of agony and horror on their faces. The friends walked on, going deeper into the shelter. The whispers grew louder and louder, filling their minds with terror and confusion. Each turn seemed to lead them further into the maze of horrors, and the feeling that they were being hunted never left them. Suddenly, they heard a door slam behind them, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, imposing man in a white lab coat, his face concealed by a surgical mask. His eyes glittered with a cold, calculating intelligence, and in his hands he held a large syringe filled with a dark, viscous liquid. The friends slowly stepped back, their fear growing as the man approached them. They realized they had to act quickly if they wanted to escape. Alex spotted a door nearby and signaled to the others. They rushed out running, the sound of their footsteps echoing down the hallway. Bursting through the door, they found themselves in an old operating room. The smell of antiseptic and decomposition lingered in the air. Rusted surgical instruments were scattered across the floor, and the walls were littered with shelves of jars of preserved specimens. Desperation spurred their movements as they searched for another way out. Mia noticed a ventilation shaft in the corner of the room. It was small, but it might be their only chance. She quickly unscrewed the grate, and one by one they made their way inside, the narrow space forcing them to move one by one. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and they heard a man's voice, calm and methodical, speaking to someone unseen. He was taunting them, enjoying the fear he instilled in them. The friends advanced down the shaft as fast as they could, the metal walls pressing down on them. Just when they thought they had gotten far enough away from their pursuer, there was a loud crack. A man had found the entrance to the mine and was trying to force his way in. Panic gripped them once again, and they rushed to find a way out. Reaching a crossroads in the mine, they turned left, hoping it would lead them to safety. The narrow passage seemed to stretch on forever, and the sound of the man following them grew fainter and fainter. At last, they saw a faint light ahead. It was another grate leading to another part of the shelter. They opened the grate and climbed out, finding themselves in an old storage room. Boxes and crates were piled in a heap, creating a maze of obstacles. They moved cautiously, the feeling of being hunted never leaving them. As they made their way around the room, they came across a staircase leading upstairs. It was their only way out. They climbed the stairs, the light getting brighter and brighter as they got closer to the top. When they exited, they found themselves in the main hallway of the asylum. The front doors could be seen ahead, and the path to freedom was finally open. But as they headed for the exit, they heard a chilling laugh echoing down the hall. A man in a lab coat was waiting for them, blocking their way. His eyes flashed with malicious delight, and he raised a syringe, its contents glistening in the dim light. The friends backed away, their fear mounting. They knew they had to fight if they were going to escape. Alex grabbed a nearby metal pipe, while Mia armed herself with a broken piece of glass. They stood their ground, ready to face the man who had tormented them. The final confrontation was intense, a desperate struggle for survival. The man's movements were quick and precise, but the friends fought with everything they had. In the chaos, the syringe was knocked from his hand, and Alex managed to land a blow that sent the man staggering back. Seizing the moment, the friends rushed for the exit. They sprinted out the doors into the night, their hearts pounding with relief. They didn't stop running until they were far from the shelter, and the dark silhouette of the building was behind them. After a few minutes, they finally stopped. Their strength was running out. Finding a small clearing, they collapsed to the ground, their breathing becoming ragged and their bodies shaking. The silence of the forest was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the horrors they had encountered in the shelter. Taking a breath, they assessed their situation. They were several miles from the nearest town and had no idea how to get back to civilization. Phones were not picking up a signal, and they had to navigate only by the dim light of the moon. But they were alive, and that was all that mattered. Alex, Mia, and Jake huddled together for warmth as the events of the previous night raced through their minds. They had discovered a nightmarish place where unspeakable experiments were being conducted, and they had barely escaped. The man's face, his cold eyes and evil smile haunted them. As the first rays of dawn began to break through the trees, they decided to set out again. They needed to find help, report what they had seen, and make sure no one else fell victim to the horrors of the forgotten orphanage. With renewed determination, they set off through the forest, following the faint hints of a trail. Several hours passed before they finally came across a road. It was a narrow, rarely used path, but it was a sign of civilization. They followed it, hoping it would lead them to safety. Their bodies ached and their minds were exhausted, but they walked forward. Eventually, they came across a small, dilapidated gas station. The sight of it brought a wave of relief. They approached it cautiously, not knowing if they could trust anyone after their ordeal. The gas station attendant, an elderly man with kind eyes, looked up in surprise as they entered. Their appearance must have spoken volumes about what they had been through. The clerk quickly called the local authorities, and a sheriff's car soon arrived. The friends recounted their horrific experience, their voices shaking as they described the shelter and the man in the lab coat. The sheriff listened intently, distrust and concern read on his face. The authorities wasted no time. They organized a team to investigate the shelter and the friends were taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Memories of the asylum haunted them, images of twisted patients and cruel experiments imprinted on their minds. Days passed, and the news spread. The authorities uncovered the dark history of the orphanage, exposing the experiments and atrocities committed there. The man in the lab coat was identified as Dr. Malcolm Reed, a disgraced scientist who continued his gruesome work in secret. He was apprehended, and his capture brought a sense of justice to friends who had suffered at his hands. But the scars of the experience remain. Alex, Mia, and Jake struggled with nightmares and the trauma of the ordeal. They leaned on each other for support, and their bond was stronger than ever. They faced unimaginable horrors and survived, but the memories would never fade. As time passed, they began to rebuild their lives. They found comfort in each other and in the knowledge that they had put an end to Dr. Reed's terror. The asylum was closed, its dark history buried under layers of security and surveillance. No one would ever suffer there again. In the end, they found the strength to survive. They faced the darkness and came out the other side. The forgotten asylum with its winding corridors and ghostly whispers was now just a memory. But the lessons they had learned, the resilience and courage they had discovered in themselves, would stay with them forever.